Hey y'all, what's up? Jason Gaddis here with the Relationship Schools podcast. Psyched to be here. Let's do this. If you're new, welcome. We talk all about love, relationships, connection, family relationships, conflict, drama, boundaries, needs, etc. And I interview experts on neuroscience, neuroplasticity, relationship coaches, counselors, therapists, social workers, everyday humans, my wife, lots of people that will help you get better at relationship. If you're returning, welcome back. So glad you're here. Okay, in this episode, I've got Michael Gurian, who is an amazing guy who's written so many books, I think over 30 books, on boys and girls, relationships, men and women, and how the male brain is different from the female brain, specifically kids. And this is a really valuable conversation for me as a parent. And I hope whether you have kids or not, you're going to get value because you're going to understand the difference between the male and the female brain. And it doesn't really matter your sexual orientation. Okay, if you're non-binary, you're still going to get a lot out of this episode. Yeah, so Michael Gurian is a marriage and family counselor in private practice and the New York Times bestselling author of 32 books published in 23 languages. As a social philosopher, he has pioneered efforts to bring neurobiology and brain research into homes, schools, corporations, and public policy. He founded the Gurian Institute, or co-founded it, and they do lots and lots of research and pilot programs, and they train professionals on how do we really raise kids in a better way. He's a speaker, he travels, he speaks to kids, he speaks to parents, he speaks to educators. He's even spoken for the United Nations on violence against women. He's provided info on boys and girls education to meet the needs of the White House. He briefed members of Congress on the boy crisis in America. So this guy is very knowledgeable. And years ago, I read The Wonder of Boys for my master's paper. I was using it as kind of research to write my master's paper in graduate school when I was studying psychology. So I was psyched to get a little time with this guy. We're going to have him back at some point and dive deeper into it. We mostly talk about boys and men in relationship, but we do cover some really interesting things about girls near the end. So I think you're going to dig it, all right? And as always, stay tuned for the end to your action step. If you want to catch me live and ask me a question, go to relationshipschool.com/training, and we'll see you there. Okay, let's do it. Welcome to the show, Michael Gurian.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Jason.
Yeah, so psyched you're here. As I was saying to you before we hit record there, that I've been tracking you for quite a while now, and I many years ago when I wrote my master's paper in graduate school, your book, I referenced your book as one of many around, my paper was about how do we raise men who are connected to themselves, and a lot of the my conclusions came to how we raise boys makes a really big difference on what kind of men we have in the world. So I'd love to talk a little bit about that, of course, and then you have a lot of experience in a number of areas. But just by way of introduction, would you give the listener here just a kind of a very minute or less sort of snapshot of what you're up to in the world? Are you married, kids, that kind of stuff would be great.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, so Michael Gurian, married to Gail, my wife, Gail Reed Gurian. We've been married 34 years. We have two daughters, actually. They're 30 and 27. One is married and one is engaged. I run the Gurian Institute. I've been doing this work for, I'm 62, so for between 30 and 40 years of research. But the Gurian Institute formed 23 years ago to take this out into the world. So this being male-female brain difference, the wonder of boys, minds of boys, saving our sons, and then the minds of girls, wonder of girls, and then relationships, what could he be thinking, lessons of lifelong intimacy. So I sort of work in all those worlds because I developed that theory on male-female brain difference. And so I apply that. So corporations apply it, schools apply it, parents apply it, and so I'm always helping people with applying it, and using science as my baseline.
Yeah, so cool. And again, thank you for all this amazing research and work you've done to help people like me that don't have to go do that. I can just refer to you,
Oh,
your
thank you.
work, and go, oh, well, Michael
Thank
Gurian
you.
says. I know that brain difference thing can be a big deal when, especially when talking about how boys learn versus how girls learn. I mean, I think that was one of my big takeaways in some of your work, and why that matters in the classroom, right?
Oh yeah, it's huge. Education is one of the big applications for this Gurian theory. The concept that if you teach, so our 2 year pilot at University of Missouri Kansas City back in the late 90s, we did a 2 year pilot in 6 school districts, and what we found is the theory is correct. If you train and teach teachers, that includes admin, et cetera, and get parents involved as well, you then those smart people innovate. And one of the things we need to train them on is male-female brain difference, because boys and girls do learn differently. That was the book that came out of the 2 year pilot. Boys and girls learn differently. And it's an issue because the academic world, which leans very much what we call academic feminism, or there are a lot of titles for it, what it means is they are not teaching the teachers this stuff when the teachers come through schools of education, because it's controversial, they say, to teach that the male and the female brain learn differently.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's controversial, because I think every teacher already knows it and every parent knows it. But anyway, so therefore they don't get it. So they start classrooms, they set up classrooms, and they're smart, wonderful people, these teachers, but they don't realize that males and females learn differently. So they have behavioral standards that they set for males and females that are the same behavioral standard. Sit still,
Mm-hmm.
don't move around, learn on worksheets, right? Males don't learn as well that way. Males tend to be more physically aggressive and rough and tumble, which is actually essential for brain development. It's a good thing,
Yeah.
but they punish that. And then they don't understand that males often need to draw before they write. All these things that are needed
Mm-hmm.
that they didn't get. So what we do is train them in that, and then the test scores go up, the grades go up for everyone, boys and girls. Behavioral discipline issues go down, bullying goes down. So that's a big piece, I think, for educators.
Why would you say this isn't yet mainstream? Is that just because of the institution or the system that this feels threatening for some reason, or?
Yeah, in Saving Our Sons, which is and Minds of Girls, these are my latest books on child development. I go through kind of what this arc looks like in the academic world, and I call it the big three: academics, government, and media. And of course, I'm generalizing. It starts in academics, and then what academics do then, to some extent, control what government and media does. And in the academic world, even though we've had brain scans showing male-female brain difference for about 60 years, 55 years, and we now have fetal brain scans at 7 and 8 months in utero showing male-female brain difference, right? Male-female brain difference already exists in utero. Even though this is the case, it is considered, it's a gender politics issue. It's considered politically incorrect for a lot of academics. And the reason, of course, is that years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, there were men out there saying, well, women's brains are smaller, so they're not as smart, and all of this, which is a bunch of old stuff that isn't obviously said anymore, but it hangs over the discussion. So the idea is coming out from an academic feminist perspective, which most or many academics do. Their perspective is you have to have sameness. You can't have revolution, feminist revolution, any of that, if you don't have sameness. So males and females have to end up being the same. And their idea is you can't advocate for LGBTQ communities or people unless you have sameness.
Yeah.
And neither of those is true. We actually advocate much better for girls and women when we understand that there is a female brain and it's a great asset. And we advocate much better for LGBTQ populations when we understand what is really happening in male and female, and where LGBTQ brains fit in the spectrum of male and female. We do better. But it's an old 100-year-old early feminist notion that still controls academe. So the teachers, even psychology students, don't get trained in it. We come out of with our degrees in psychology, and we don't really know, why is it that most clients are actually female? Why is it that males stay away from therapy? Well, because it's not set up for males. It's much better set up for females. But we don't learn that. So we have to learn it later. And that's what I'm trying to help people with.
Yeah, talk about that a little more in terms of why men might resist therapy. Can you dig into that a little bit?
Yeah, the primary reason our research shows, and this is, pretty robust. I mean, we have decades of research in this, and the primary reason is actually not the popular concept that men don't cry or talk about their feelings, and therefore they don't go into therapy, right? That's not causal. It is more difficult for men to talk about their feelings, and the male brain is set up to create more difficulty there than the female brain. Much more of the female brain is already invested in connecting words to feelings. So female has an advantage there. But men will do it if it's done in a way that fits them. So for instance, when we train therapists and they alter the way they provide therapy, and here's some of the things they do. They walk with their clients, the first 15 minutes, rather than having them sit for 50 minutes. They walk with them for the first 15. Most females won't say yes to that. Most of them just come in and go, I'm ready to talk. I'm ready to sit down. Yeah. But most men will say, yeah, I'd love to take a walk. Sure. And what that creates is the shoulder to shoulder contact rather than a constant eye to eye, which is harder for males. And then it also allows more of the male brain to be activated because he's physically moving. More of the cerebellum activation activates more of the top of the brain where words to feelings are. And so that's one innovation that retains more men in therapy. They already see, oh yeah, this therapist understands me. Because the reason they leave therapy, they're brought in by spouses, or if they're kids, boys, they're brought in by moms. But the reason they leave therapy is they say that therapist doesn't understand me. That therapist is not for me. That therapist doesn't understand me. What they're trying to say is kind of the deep truth, which is that therapist doesn't understand males, has not been trained in males or male brain. So another thing they do is they throw objects back and forth in therapy to make sure that objects are moving in space, which is another way to keep the male brain activated and trigger more word centers. So these innovations then close the gap. Now more males are staying in therapy. So we're always working with males to try to get them to talk more about what they feel. We're all involved in that. But the concept that males are defective in therapy is incorrect. It's correct. The way we provide therapy that's defective for males.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great. That's super helpful. And let me back up a step and talk about the boy that got hurt that then later in life comes into therapy. So
trauma.
Yeah. So my understanding of your work and sort of my own conclusions with my experience, and I have a son, and when I was a kid, I had a stern father. My emotions sort of got sequestered in service of, exchange of like performance and like fitting in and making sure I was doing sort of what I was supposed to do as a boy. I call that male conditioning. And then, a couple decades of that and being extremely emotionally shut down, but very sensitive underneath it. I had a big problem, right, inside, especially in intimate relationships. So can you talk about, I guess, the cost of that? There's not only how boys learn in school, but there's also how boys are taught to do relationships and how boys are taught to do feelings.
Right.
And what that looks like later on.
Yeah, absolutely. The male brain will sequester emotions anyway. So as males develop, testosterone is a large part of why. As males develop, that will tend to happen anyway. Males will not devote as much of their brain to emotional processing as females at the baseline. So we should expect that.
And so that's not conditioning. You're just saying that's
that's just the way the brain is set up. Yeah,
less relational.
We have. What's that?
Could it be? Is it too reductionistic to say the male brain from birth, basically, or utero, is less relational? Is that too reductionistic to say that?
No, it's relational, but you were just talking about words to feelings, or talking about your feelings, or processing your feelings. That's male brain, but there can be an overlay, right, where it goes to an extreme. Because the natural sequestering of those emotions and the lack of emotional processing at the baseline in comparison to female, if you, in the situation you just described, if you have someone who is constantly shutting down that male's development of of words to feeling ratios, which is really what they are, which is his ability to talk about what he's feeling. If that constantly gets shut down, then that's another layer. So then when he's in relationships, what we need to do is one, we have to help everyone understand, especially women. Let's for a moment say this will be a heterosexual relationship. We have to especially help women understand that males do this anyway. Mm-hmm. That after the 1 to 2 years of all the hormonology that's creating that bonding and all the sex, right, that influences the hormonology that creates the bonding for this couple, that after that 1 to 2 years, it's very common to expect that, and especially in 4 out of 5 cases, that the males are going to go back to sequestering. Right. So we got to talk about with females about the fact that they've got to work out rituals to get these feelings out of guys, that males are going to be very performance oriented. It's wired in, all these things we have to teach them, and they have better relationships with men. But at the same time, right, we have to be teaching the men, okay, you have to develop, this is what happened for you, and this is how your brain works. And you want this relationship to survive to 30 or 50 years. So what you have to do is develop rituals for listening and responding, and we'll help you learn those. And so for instance, one of the rituals I teach men is to listen until the third repetition. So to listen to what she is saying and what she is feeling with, about him or about something else. Listen, hear the first repetition, which is really going to be the first time she says something. Then the second time is a repetition, but don't interrupt yet. And then the third time, that time when you hear the exact same thing, then she's emotively processed, and now is the time to start problem solving. So which is what he's going to want to do. He's going to want to problem solve, right?
3 times, totally.
But he's got to listen. So now that means 5 to 10 minutes of her talking, or whatever it ends up being. And that then will also, as she talks, trigger more of his emotion. And when he goes through problem solving, which is what he will probably want to do to become involved, it won't be condescending, it won't be non-listening, and it'll help trigger whatever feelings he's having. So we teach him these methods, but males and females will never be on par with emotive processing, because when males are having an emotive experience, 2 parts of the brain light up. When females are having an emotive experience, 9 parts of the brain light up. So we should not expect that males and females, at a baseline will have the same emotive experiences.
Yeah. Now, you talked about gay relationships, LGBTQ. Is that whether, let's say, 2 men are together, those brains are the same? So are we talking about, or is the brain start to develop differently? Are you saying that 2 gay men in a relationship, they're both going to be sort of compromised in this area?
Not necessarily, because of course they'll be with each other. Some interesting facts. So gayness, homosexuality or gayness, LGB, the LGB part's lesbian, gay, bisexual. That's handled in one part of the brain, only one part of the brain. Sexual orientation is handled in the sexually dimorphic nucleus in the anterior hypothalamus. That's where that's handled. So 5 to 10% of mammals have a same-sex orientation. That's not just humans, but other mammals. 90 to 95% are heterosexual. So with some bi mixed in, but basically heterosexual, opposite sex, looking for the other sex. So for those who are in the 5 to 10%, we always want to remember their brains are still male or female brains, as you're saying, because that's handled in one part of the brain. But interestingly, because male and female brain are set up in utero, and they're set up through hormone surges, estrogen, testosterone, etc., it's not just that nucleus, but among gay people, you find more feminine gay men, you find more masculinized gay women. And that's because of the way the hormones set up that nucleus in utero, then that affects the rest of the brain. And another interesting fact, when gay or lesbian couples get together, they tend to do just what, like heterosexuals, they tend to try to pick the opposite or the complementary. So you find, as you may know, you find a more feminine gay male, let's see, with a more masculine gay male. and with lesbian couples as well, more feminine, more masculine, and they become complementary. And so that the human brain is amazing. And we have scans of gay brains, and I show these when I give my talks, all of which now are on Zoom, pretty much. But when I show them, I show these scans of gay males, lesbian females, and you can see that if you're a lesbian female, more of your brain is operating a little more male than a heterosexual female. If you're a gay male, more of your brain is operating a little more female. And then when you get to trans, which is only about 0.3% of human beings, but when you get to trans, that's when you see much more, where you have, male anatomy, but 28 or 30 centers in your brain are operating female if you're trans, or again, the other way, female body anatomy, but around 28 to 30 brain centers are operating male. So gay is on the spectrum. You get a little bit of change, and then you go all the way out to trans, and that's when your brains are almost in opposition, and that's why it's so difficult for trans adolescents and adults, and why many of them or some of them go through change.
Wow, this is fascinating. Hey listeners, Jason here. If you want to get the latest and greatest training from me and ask me a live question, go to relationshipschool.com/training. And you can learn everything from how to get your needs met, to attachment dynamics, to how to work through conflict successfully, to how to become a relationship coach. So there's a lot of training. Go to relationshipschool.com/training, and we'll see you in our next training. Let me come back to this notion of the 2 parts light up for the man and 9 parts for the woman, right? Or female, male.
Yeah.
I'm just so curious again, you're basically suggesting that men need to listen 3 times to what she's saying. That helps her. And then he kind of, something comes online for him. Now, where does empathy fit in? Some women or people might judge men as not having a lot of empathy. So can you talk about how that might correlate to the brain or the male brain?
Yeah, this is also fascinating. Of course, everyone's empathic. So I think you, don't buy into any stereotypes that men aren't empathic and women are and all of that.
Sure.
But we know what people are trying to get at when they say that. But men are empathic in their own way. Women are empathic in their own way. And that would be what I would add to the conversation. Everyone's empathic, but in their own way. So, for instance, why is there a difference? A primary reason that there's a difference in the way that empathy is experienced among males and females is the insula. So the insula is the mirror neuron nucleus in the middle of the brain. And when I'll use Gail and myself, something's going on. I can see she's in pain. My insula is going to light up, and I'm going to get mirror neurons forming in my insula. Okay, this happened for everybody.
Okay.
Similarly, she sees I'm in pain, her insula swells up with mirror neurons, and she creates these mirror neurons, and that's how she's empathic. The difference, though, is that the female brain retains its mirror neurons and insula much longer than the male. The male brain retains those mirror neurons for a shorter period of time. So let me give an example I gave in The Wonder of Boys, because you mentioned that book. And this is one I use in my talks that people, I think, really get. You have 10 to 12-year-old boys and girls. They're playing street hockey. They've put up, and this happened a block from my house, so I used it in my book. They put up their nets, their little nets. They're on their rollerblades. They're playing, et cetera, et cetera. 11-year-old boy falls down, slightly skins his knee, falls down. A girl from the other team near him stops playing this aggressive game, right? She stops it, and she moves over to the boy, touches him on the shoulder, looks him in the eye. Are you okay? What can I do? But the 12-year-old boy, who's sort of the alpha, who's on his team, comes by in his rollerblades, looks at the fallen boy, spends a few moments ascertaining whether the boy is okay or not, and as he goes by, says, "Get up, we need you." So I use that as an example of empathy nurturance versus aggression nurturance. Males tend more toward aggression nurturance because our insula does not stay swollen for as long. We shut those mirror neurons down if we don't see, severe pain severe trauma, something we have to get involved in, crisis, we shut them down and we move back into the aggression framework, which, or in a coupleship, it would be the problem solving framework.
Yeah.
So the parts of our brain that's sort of at the top, somewhat down in the temporal parietal junction, that's a problem solving part of the brain. And for males, that part of the brain lights up more than for females when you're having an emotive experience. And that's what happened in that 12-year-old boy. His insula shut down the mirror neurons because the kid wasn't dead or in severe crisis. And his brain said, we need this kid. And that's problem solving. We need him to win this game. We got to get him back up. And that boy did not say, oh, you pansy, or, words that I can't use on the air, you're worthless. He didn't say that. What he said is, get up, we need you. And that's the same thing that happens with couples as with healthy couples. The male is listening because he is empathic. The mirror neurons are firing, and he's forcing his brain to keep them firing during the time of listening. Because remember, in his brain, many of the things she's talking about, he's going to be thinking, let's just solve that problem.
Right,
because that doesn't sound like it's a huge deal.
Yeah.
Now, he makes big mistakes if he doesn't listen, because many of the times it is a huge deal and he misses that. And that's why this 3 times rule is smart, because that gives him time to understand how big a deal it is. Yeah. So that's so that insula, that mirror neurons, are a big reason that all of us, common sense level, see male-female differences in empathy. But it's not that males aren't empathic. It's that they're more toward the aggression nurturance side, and they spend less time worrying about whether someone's crying or whether they're skinned their knee. They just don't worry as much about it.
Yeah, totally. Okay, very helpful, especially just for the empathy differences in my own marriage. I can really see that. That's a cool explanation. How are you recommending parents raise boys right now? I get it about school. Like, look, we learn differently. And in the home, though, if we want to have, my sort of judgment is like, I want to see more boys who are connected to their sensitivity and their relational aptitude in life, because I think the world might be a better place. So I'm curious what you think of that, and how do we raise boys in such a way that they can still be aggressive and rough, but also not lose that relational capacity?
Yeah. Luckily we can do both. We can, a few things for us to know. 1 in 5 boys, just like 1 in 5 girls, are what we would call sensitive or highly sensitive. So on the spectrum, we're going to see, and so you asked about boys, let's stay there for a moment. Yeah. They're going to be sensitive. So if I'm a parent of one of them, I need to know that. And I need to immediately go, okay, always doing aggression nurturance with this boy is not going to work. And I need to, and one thing I especially need to do is make sure that I have bi-strategic parenting for that boy. Bi-strategic parenting means that the parents are having different influences. And that's one of the core concepts that I teach based on the science research. We do not want the parents to be the same. Yeah. That's a pop psych myth. Parents actually should be quite different with their kids. Their values can be the same. Sure. Don't commit crimes. Have the same values, but the way they parent, their parenting styles ought to be different, because kids need bi-strategic assets and multi-strategic assets. They need, 5, 10 different ways of parenting them so they get the best of all. So that in itself is going to help these sensitives. And then because you're going to have one parent who's going to be incredibly sensitive probably with that boy, and then another one who's more pushy, oh, come on, don't be so sensitive. And that's okay, as long as that, oh, come on, don't be so sensitive parent isn't always interrupting, never listening. Okay, that's going to backfire. The kid's going to end up hating that guy. Now, overall, for getting more sensitivity into America, let's say more male sensitivity into America, I think the way that happens is here are 3 things we can do as we're raising kids. 1, raise them toward resilience. Both males and females. That means not intervening so much in what goes on in their lives. And we have thought that to help our sensitive kids, we're going to want to intervene all the time, because let's take sibling rivalry. One kid, let's say, is I'll do myself and my brother. He was 2 years older than me. So in my era, I'm 62. In my era, parents didn't intervene, and I'm a sensitive boy. Okay, I was a sensitive boy, but parents didn't intervene when my older brother was roughhousing, et cetera, et cetera. And that was actually good because that forced me to mature, to battle back, to be resilient. And I could be a sensitive kid, but also resilient. One of the big problems we have with sensitive males who become adults is they're not mature. They're not resilient. They're 25 or 30, and they really don't have resilience or a core self.
Yeah.
So their sensitivity actually becomes a burden on them and others.
Yeah.
So number one is resilience. Number two is purpose. Raise all of these boys, wherever they are on the spectrum, with purpose, so that that sensitivity for that sensitive guy, that sensitivity is moved through purposeful action, honorable work, doing chores, becoming the therapist of the household, which a lot of these sensitive kids become. All of that, give the kid purpose, because that helps him toward maturity. And then number three, yes, be specifically focused on how to get out of males what they're feeling, but not so over-focused on it that they, don't take us seriously anymore. In other words, we've got to really target what they're feeling and when, and then target those things. And as we're targeting them, remember that to get them to talk about their feelings at 12, we may need to go play basketball with the sensitive guy before we sit down and talk to him about it.
Totally.
In other words, we shouldn't expect that just because he's sensitive, he's not a male brain.
Yeah. Okay, so just to review, resiliency, second one was purpose, and third one was, in one word, what would you call that?
The third one is bringing the feelings out of him.
Okay.
So in other words, doing his emotive development in a way that fits his sensitivity. Yeah,
great. And I imagine parents need to do their work, right? Because if I'm a dad that hasn't done that, I've sort of pushed my sensitivity aside, it's going to be hard for me to accommodate a sensitive child, a sensitive boy, or even develop these three things maybe in the boy.
Well, I'm going to say a both and there. If we're using bi-strategic and multi-strategic parenting, then we're okay. Then each parent is himself or herself. So to use your example,
giving them the download that they need to give them. Yep.
Yeah, each parent will give what the kid needs from that parent, and the kid will be getting the other thing from this other person and coaches and aunts and uncles, etc. Human beings, we want to remember, human children have always been parented that way, bi-strategic and multi-strategic. And that made up for what were the perceived flaws in each parent. So if the perceived flaw in the parent you've described, let's say, is a guy who was, I think to follow your arc, you were saying traumatized, not able to express feelings as a kid, becomes a man who perhaps actually is still operating of trauma, does not express feelings well, is now parenting. Okay. Yeah. The backup is that, and that guy probably, when he parents, is going to parent more toward aggression, more toward
shaming.
Could be more shaming. Yep, absolutely. More hierarchical, etc. So that can be okay. I mean, we'll talk about shame and guilt. That excessive shaming is dangerous to core self. So we definitely. But a lot of these parents, a lot of these guys don't do that now. They did 30 years ago, 50 years ago, but now they've kind of been sensitized to it, and they understand that they don't parent like mom, that they father, but they're not doing it as much. They're not doing the constant shaming as much, because you're right. That's dangerous to core self. We don't want that. But a lot of those same aggressive guys who were traumatized, a lot of them actually automatically raise their kids toward purpose. Like which is good. They don't, and they raise them toward resiliency, which is good. So they cover those two. They just don't cover number three very well.
Yeah, totally. Okay, well, we're winding down. I have so many more questions, and I do want to get into girls. Perhaps that's another podcast. But in a nutshell, would you say, I guess as a species here, you gave us some kind of great tips on how to raise boys a little differently here. Is there anything that the parents listening can do in terms of raising girls differently? Are we on track there, or?
Right. A lot of what I'm saying is in Saving Our Sons for Boys, and then all of what I'm about to say. And if we do another program on girls, I'm glad to do that. I have two daughters, of course, so I love that. Yeah. A lot of that's in Minds of Girls. So all I'm going to be is really quick, but Minds of Girls is, 300 pages of it. A few
Cool.
things to recognize with girls. I'll give the big stuff. One is what we called girl drama, which is a popularized term for the stuff that girls do, especially between about 8 and 18 with each other. A lot of that, the good news for parents is a lot of that is normal. It's not bad. It's not bullying. It's normal. And what girls are doing is they're developing boundaries and they're developing resilience through that girl drama. Some of it becomes cyberbullying or bullying and is therefore trauma and dangerous. And so we think around 15, 17% of it. But the rest of it, while very painful, just like it's very painful for guys to be constantly badgered to force resilience, same for girls. A lot of that girl drama is badgering them and forcing them to challenge back and to develop boundaries and a core self. Right? Because a lot of the drama is, I hate you, you're terrible, you're ugly, you're worthless, all of this stuff. And then 2 years later, they're friends again. So a lot of it is this transitory drama. And what we can do with girls, sort of 8 to 18 is but it could be before, it could be after. What we can do with girls is to help them understand it, because it will happen. There is no way around it. Girls have done this with each other for millennia. Yeah. So we help them understand it and then coach them. Okay, here's how did you think of responding that way when she cut you down? What about if you said this? And I did this with my two daughters. They were 3 years apart, and so they would be badgering each other all the time. And I actually compelled the older one at a certain point to teach the younger one better comebacks, because the younger one's 3 years younger, right? Not as verbally adept. And I begged and ultimately made the older one teach the younger one comebacks, so they could handle the drama and develop their own resilience and boundaries. So that's one piece of big news. Another area we could talk about in the future, if you want, is the whole girls and STEM conversation, because there is a massive amount of brain research that we can bring into this. And if parents are wanting their girls, more science, more math, more technology, more engineering from them, then we have to teach parents and teachers what's going on with female brain. And why is it that so many engineers are male and so many coders are male? Well, some of it is sexism, but very little anymore is sexism in Google, in Microsoft. They are definitely anti-sexist, but still 80% of the coders and 80% of the electrical and mechanical engineers are male. What's going on? Well, actually, there's a whole bunch of brain development stuff we have to talk about regarding female brain and adjusting the way that we especially teach female brain in order to help females catch up later in those STEM areas. And that's another big topic where male-female brain difference can come into play.
Yeah, so cool. Wow. I mean, we're just getting warmed up and we got to stop. So thank you. I got two more questions for you.
Yep.
One of our missions here at the Relationship School is to reach a lot of young people. So this is partly why I'm a parent, and I worked with teens for years. I was a teen who went through some stuff, like a lot of our listeners. And we want to reach young people, especially with relationship education, so that when kids are struggling in high school or middle school or even college, relationally, they feel like they can actually hang in that environment and work through the conflict, work through the differences, etc. So if I had a group of 1,000, say, high school students, and I could only teach them one thing about relationships or love, and you were whispering in my ear, what would you want me to tell that group of teens?
Well, you're already saying incredible things. What would Michael Gurian add to it and whisper? It would be what I do in the schools myself. I show them brain scans. So what I talk to them about is that one thing, how male and female are different, and the whole spectrum of it. So it includes everyone on the spectrum, and then help them to understand how to do relationship with the other. That's the part I can add to all the already good things that all of us in the psych field are doing. I add the male-female part, and I find that 5th grade on up, they're able to understand the brain scans, and they're able to understand, and so girls especially who are quicker to figure it out will go, that's why the boys do that, and then boys a little slower to pick it up will go, that's why the girls do that. And so if I whispered anything, I would stay within my specialty, which would probably be teach them male-female, so they have the right expectations for male-female relationships. And so that once they understand male-female, they're going to understand better how to do communication and conflict. A lot of mistakes they're making, they won't make. Now, what I would add, though, is trauma. One thing to always remember that we always have to teach everyone is that if those males, especially if those males have been traumatized in the past, it's going to be very hard for them to do relationship in the ways that we are teaching everyone to do it, because so much of the male brain, once traumatized, moves signaling toward the amygdala and the anger parts of the amygdala. So males become angry. That anger is not a defect per se, even though people are scared of it. That anger should be a clue to us that, oh, wow, he's always getting angry. Let's try to figure out why. Maybe it's in his personality genome, but probably traumatized by child abuse, by sexual abuse, something in an intimate relationship traumatized him. And so he operates out of anger as defense. Yeah. So that would be another thing I'm constantly trying to teach young people. If you got a guy that's always getting angry, stay away from him, but also try to help him figure out why.
Yeah, and what happened. I love it because the male and female brain being so different, it also helps people make each other wrong less and themselves wrong less, right?
Less, right.
Yeah.
They shame themselves and others less.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, thank you. And where can people find you, Michael?
Yeah, you can go to michaelgurian.com. And you can go to gurianinstitute.com. Most of the education work and a lot of the parenting work is there at gurianinstitute.com. But michaelgurian.com has all my books and everything. And for what we ended up talking about today, Minds of Girls and Saving Our Sons would be sort of the key. People can get those kind of anywhere.
Great starting points. Okay, awesome. Well, again, thanks for what you're doing in the world. It's been super valuable for me, and I know our listeners are going to get a ton out of this.
Oh, thanks, Jason. Thanks for what you're doing.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, action step. Go check out Michael Gurian at the Gurian Institute. And he's got a great website, 32-something books. I mean, that's ridiculous. I would start with the 2 he mentioned at the very end there. Just rewind that part if you want to catch that. If you're interested in what we're talking about. And he's also got ones on intimacy and so many other subjects. So, just check out his library on his website. All right? Next, what about an action step for you? Besides that, well, I thought it was interesting how men and women listen differently. And so I think the first step, let's talk heteronormative language, even though you might be in a gay relationship. So the masculine partner, let's say, struggles to listen and they want to fix, or one partner wants to fix. Then do the thing he suggested 3 times. Listen to it. I want to make sure I got it. Can you say it again, honey? Yep. One more time. That slows you down out of problem-solving fix-it mode, and maybe would have your person feel more understood by you. I'm not sure, but try it and see what happens, right? And then if you're the more feminine partner, the woman, let's say, perhaps something you can try is to not expect your masculine partner or the man to do it like you. And I thought it was really interesting about how he talked about the therapy. Men, hey, let's go on a walk for a man, which doesn't work so much during COVID, although you could just say, hey, let's do phone for the first 15 minutes and then let's get on a Zoom call. I guess you could do that for you coaches out there. But I thought that was really interesting. I think there's something to that. I know when I worked with resistant teenage boys, sitting down eye to eye, face to face, was usually not what I would do because it didn't work. I would usually sit next to them or go on a walk with them or throw the ball with them or do something like that, which suggests kind of what Michael's talking about here. Yeah, and then talk about this as a partnership, or if you're single, find a friend who listens to this podcast and break this down, all right? I always want you to do an action step that involves another person. At the very least, share what you just learned from the podcast with another person. It keeps you in relationship, right, with other people. Hey, friend, can I tell you about this cool podcast to listen to? All right? Awesome. Okay, make sure you go check out our latest live training at relationshipschool.com/training if you want to catch me live, ask me a question, etc. Okay? Thanks, everybody. Have a beautiful day, morning, evening, wherever you are, and we'll talk soon. Hey, thanks so much for listening. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel. Share one of these videos with a friend. We want to help the planet get their act together around relationships. And you are one of them, so thank you.